years ago, Curtis and I went to Houston to do an ACU event, and he arranged for me to preach at a church. What church was that on that Sunday night? Do you remember? It doesn't matter. I didn't mean for it to be a quiz. Predominantly African American church. So I was really looking forward to it because those brothers and sisters encourage your preaching. And so I had my sermon prepared, and I said my text for tonight is, and everybody stood up. And this was disconcerting because I wasn't anywhere near ready to do my text. I had this elegant 5-minute introduction to my text, but now they're all standing up, so there's nothing to do but read it. It also choked me up because so often in churches, the time people pay the least attention is when Scripture is being read. And here's a church that had trained itself that when you say you're going to read the text, everybody stands up and pays attention. Okay, so my text is Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." You may be seated. It is extraordinarily difficult to explain what a disaster the exile is for Israel. A centuries-long history has come to this very inglorious end. It has turned out that God cannot defend his city, that God cannot defend his temple, or he has decided not to and abandon his people. They're refugees. They're exiles. And the glory and the dream has come to a crashing close. So in one of those exilic psalms we read, "How can I sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" And you all know the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, who deserve to be famous for their names, if nothing else, and their willingness to be committed to this God who has been in a decades-long slump. Now, it's easy when you kind of read the Bible because you get the highlights of God to think that he's doing a miracle every moment of every day, but that's far from true. And in fact, for them, he hasn't done anything recently. And so they say, "Okay, king, you can do your worst, but our God is able to save us." And then that line, "But even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship your gods." And I can't help but think that in the midst of that, even if he doesn't, there isn't and he probably won't, because he hasn't lately. We won't worship your gods. That's scene one. Scene two. This is a postmodern sermon. There are several scenes, and then we'll see if they have anything to do with each other. As I decided to back away for a couple of years from a lot of my public ministry, I was thinking about, okay, what else do I want to do here? And I'd lived in Abilene for 20 years, and I felt like I'd never done anything meaningful for my city, other than be the designated juror for Taylor County. I have been called for jury duty somewhere between a dozen and 20 times. Have served on 3 juries, and been foreman on 2. But, that just happens occasionally. But I think I have gum on my card. But I decided to get trained as a CASA volunteer. I thought that's something I can do for my city. A CASA is a court-appointed special advocate for children. So when children wind up in the CPS system, the Child Protective Service system, the court will sometimes appoint an advocate on their behalf. Because the judge has 400 cases, the CPS worker has 40 cases, but the CASA worker just has 1. And it's our job to make sure that the interests of that child are protected. And so I've done this for a couple of years, had a couple of cases, can't tell you anything about it because I'm bound by confidentiality, but I can say this without violating the confidentiality at all. There has not been a single moment in those 2 years when I have never felt that I wasn't over my head. There has never been a moment, not one, where I felt competent to do what I was trying to do. Life's not very fair. And the hills that have to be climbed are so high. I think I can tell this without violating any confidence. One day I got a legal document, and I read it, and I didn't understand it. And so I thought, well, I'm just not concentrating. So I closed my door, I got quiet, and I read it. And I didn't understand it. It could mean either one of 2 things. It could have meant yes, or it could have been no, and I couldn't figure out which one it was. And so I called up my supervisor, and she says, yeah, I read that document too, and I don't understand it either. Called the lawyer, couldn't get a hold of him, CPS worker, they couldn't find the document. And after a few hours, I gave up. I thought, okay, think about the people in this system who aren't as educated as I am, don't have the cultural power that I have, and they're trying to negotiate this system, and it only took 1 afternoon for me to get so frustrated I gave up. There's never been a moment when I haven't felt like I was over my head. Scene number 3. Dr. Kent Brantley is getting ready to go back to Africa. He has written in his book a little description of a conversation that he and I had while he had Ebola, and I now want to set the record straight and give my side of that conversation. It's kind of his story to tell, but he's got his version, I've got mine. I was preaching at the Southside Church in Fort Worth, where Dr. Brantley is a member. I was just doing 3 or 4 weeks there for him in the summer, and I was over there on a Saturday night getting ready to preach the next Sunday morning. And I either got a call or a text or a message. It's all a blur to me now, from Kent's brother, whom I had met briefly in Michigan when I was preaching up there the year before. And the message basically said, you probably haven't heard this, but Kent's been diagnosed with Ebola. He is probably not long for this world. Would you call him? And he gave me the information I needed to call him in Liberia. Well, this is kind of my part of the story that Kent doesn't necessarily know. I couldn't do it. I was absolutely paralyzed, frozen. Okay, I'm going to call this dying man, and what am I going to say? And so it was several hours. I couldn't get my arms around this idea. So I called him, and we got the time thing worked out, and I'm going to go preach at his church in a few hours. And I've always said I hope Kent doesn't have any strong memories of what I said, because I said nothing that wasn't meaningless. But I do remember what he said. And this was before he got much more desperately ill. This was before he drew near to death. And I said, what do you want me to say to your church? I'm going to talk there in a few hours. What do you want me to say? And what he said is, tell him Daniel 3, verses 16 through 18. Tell him, I hope the Lord spares my life. I want to live. But even if he doesn't, that I'll worship him and not the false gods. Scene number 4. I came to my love for classical music very late in life. I did not grow up in a home that ever played classical music. Roy Acuff isn't classical, is he? I did go hear Roy Acuff perform one time at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. He was so senile, he sang the same song twice in a row. And when they pointed it out to him, he said, well, it's a good one. Yeah. And so, like a lot of people, I have no education in music. I don't understand music. And I played saxophone in the high school band, but that really didn't have much to do with music. And so I sort of started at the center like everybody does, and listened to a lot of Beethoven and Mozart and all that. And so in later years, now I've started to reach out and find out, okay, what else is out there? And at some point I was in a used record store, and I saw Bach's Mass in B minor. Well, I kind of like Bach a little bit. It's kind of easy listening. And so I came and I put it on, started to listen to it. It's 2 hours long. But the first 20 minutes are the constant repetition of just a couple of words. And it's haunting. It's Kyrie, Lord, eleison, have mercy on us. And I don't understand what all is going on musically, although some well-meaning friends have tried to teach me unsuccessfully. But a music writer has put it this way: it's as if the chorus is saying, "Lord, Lord, Lord, we're down here. We could use a little mercy here. Are you listening?" And when you listen to the piece, it's like that. It's like, "Lord, have mercy. Lord, Lord, have mercy." That has become one of my favorite prayers. It may also be the greatest piece of music ever written out of religious devotion. And when I'm overwhelmed with my CASA case, I say, "Lord, have mercy." And when I'm overwhelmed with my friend who has Ebola, it's, "Lord, have mercy." And sometimes it's, "Lord, Lord, Lord, could you use some mercy down here?" And Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego have become sort of Jewish saints for me. Okay, God, I know you can do this. But even if you don't, I don't want to worship other gods. I just want to worship you. And I'm not much of a futurist. I don't know what's going to happen to Christianity in North America. I don't know what's going to happen to your particular congregation. But whether God decides to intervene in the way that we want him to or not, our commitment needs to be only this God will we worship. And we have got to be relatively unmoved by both our successes and our failures. One of the things the New Testament is really clear about is we're not any good at figuring out what looks like success and what looks like failure anyway. You know, that whole mustard seed thing, you know, it doesn't look like much, but it turns out to be something really spectacular. And, you know, that seed that's growing in one place looks like it's going to be a great harvest, and then it just kind of withers away. We're not any good at scorekeeping anyway. And the ability to release that and say, whatever it's going to be, Lord, have mercy. And we'll worship only this God. I was on sabbatical in the spring, and among the other things I was doing is I'm working on a systematic theology, which for somebody at the end of his career, as I'm nearing, that's what a theologian does. You try to say everything that you've been trying to say for the last 20 years and say it as clearly as you can, and that's what you do at the end. By the way, I'm looking around. Some of you are probably not going to live long enough to see that finished. I am trying to beat my own deadline, which is before I die. You know, I've started over twice, and that really slows things down. Right at the moment, at the front of the book, and using the term book loosely, there's no book. I quote a poem from Tennyson, one of my favorite poems. Alfred Lord Tennyson says, "Our little systems have their day. They have their day and cease to be. They are but broken lights of thee. And thou, O Lord, are more than they." Which, for somebody who's trying to write a systematic theology, is a really good reminder. Our little systems have their day. They have their day and cease to be. I don't know. Maybe that's a really good idea for congregations too. Our little churches have their day. They have their day and cease to be. They are but broken lights of thee. And thou, O Lord, are more than they. I can live with that. I can live with that. Lord, have mercy.